Hello YouTubers. This video is going to be about Venomfangx. Yeah, I know. He's made some stupid videos in the past, but the stupidity level in this latest video of his about time and dates is just off the scale. So, shall we start?
What I'm going to do in this video is show you that a creationist, which I happen to be, has the ability to refute any claims that the anti-creationists make regarding ages and dates.
You see what I mean? And he hasn't even got started yet. This is gonna get silly.
Full-grown man and a full-grown woman who are fully mature, able to get married and communicate and copulate all in 6 days. Well then, if you came to that creation on the 6th day and you looked around and said, you know what, that guy over there, that guy named Adam, he must be about 18 years old, because based on my observations in the present, I know it takes a human being about 18 years to reach that level of maturity. Therefore, he must be 18 years or older.
Yeah, you would. Because that would be a perfectly reasonable assumption, lacking any other information. Do you not see how that works?
You'd be wrong. You'd be wrong. And so too, every argument that the anti-creationists use is using the same kind of argumentation. They're using present-day observations and extrapolating that back into an indefinite past with no reverence or respect for any X factors or other possibilities.
So, what we know in the present can't be extrapolated to try and work out what happens in the past, because we fail to consider X factors and this, that and the other. But this isn't the case, because if we'd found some evidence of something else that had been going on, we would investigate that and then, extrapolate from that as well. But being there is no evidence for any X factors, why should we consider them?
And then, based on those assumptions that they're making, based on those calculations, they say they know for a fact that the Earth is billions of years old and therefore creation's not true.
Yeah, the universe is 14 billion years old, and the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. And yeah, it is a fact. But fact is empirical. Basically, empirical fact or empirical truth means that it's as true as it can be, and to what we know with all the evidence that we have gathered. But it's not possible to know absolute truth, because for all we know, we could all be brains in jars plugged into a computer somewhere. I mean, I don't believe that for a minute, but it's technically possible, I suppose.
But they're assuming, of course, that creation is not true before they do any calculation.
I think you're a little bit wrong there, because scientists don't assume that creation didn't happen. Scientists don't actually assume anything. What we actually do is we look at the evidence and see where it leads. And if it led to creation, then that's where it led. But unfortunately it didn't. It led in completely opposite direction.
So if you want to say you know something for a fact, what you first need to do is rule out every other possible X factor that may alter your conclusion. Because if you're making assumptions prior to your conclusion, what's going to happen is that assumption is going to bleed its way into your conclusion. If you assume creation is false prior to your dating methods, then why are you surprised when your conclusions end up being anti-creation?
Well, again, I'll say that we don't assume that creation wasn't true, because we just follow the facts and that's where they lead. That's what it is. So creation is false because the facts lead away from it. But didn't you just make the same argument that all creationists make? Just trying to make it the opposite way around? You know how creationists mostly presuppose that God exists and creation is true, and then try and make the facts fit around it. That's really not how science works, and I really think you need to get yourself a bit of an education.
So if I don't assume that creation is false prior to me looking at distant starlight, then what I'm going to try and do is explain distant starlight from a creation model as a possibility. And I can think of lots of ways. Maybe God sped up the speed of light. Maybe he made the light already in transit. Or maybe, there's other possibilities. And even if I can't think of another possibility, doesn't mean I've exhausted all options. Because, let's face it, I'm not all-knowing.
Oh, you're making me smoke more. I'm sorry, but that was just the biggest lot of crap I've ever heard. You assume it's true and then fit the facts around it again, like I just said. And no, you're definitely not all-knowing. In fact, it seems like you know fuck all.
So there is maybe a possibility that there is an alternate explanation than what I'm giving. And as long as I'm open to that, I can't emphatically say with certainty that I know for a fact that starlight is the result of millions and billions of years based on my calculations of the speed of light in the present.
No, you're right, but there's no evidence to suggest that the speed of light was any different in the past. To actually make your argument, you have to provide evidence to say that it was different in the past, and there isn't any. It's a logical fallacy to say you don't really know, so therefore we're inserting God. It's a crap argument.
I can't know that for a fact because I haven't factored in all the possible X factors. There might be unknowns that I don't know because I'm not all-knowing. And so long as that's a possibility, we have a shopping mall situation.
Over and over and over again, you're making the same argument. Give up. Nobody believes you because you're just a fool.
We have the anti-creationists making assumptions, and most of them aren't aware that they're doing this.
Do you think maybe that we're not aware because we're actually not doing that? And maybe it's you that's making assumptions? I really think that might be the case.
And that's why the academic world, scientific world, is so fraught with people who are anti-creationists. And so often anti-creationists make appeals to popularity. It's a fallacy in logic, and they do it all the time. They say, well, the whole academic field unanimously agrees that starlight, for example, is the result of millions and billions of years of starlight traveling at the speed of light that we presently observe.
An appeal to popularity? You're just getting more moronic by the second. There's a reason the whole academic field agrees about starlight taking millions and millions of years to get here from wherever. It's because all the evidence and all the research that has been done says it is.
And that assumption, the assumption that creation is not true, without making any appeal to even the possibility of God, in the academic world, it begins in high school. God's not mentioned in the science classes as even a possibility. Then they go to college, same thing. It's reinforced, this anti-creationist position, and then they go into the academic field. The entire academic world has largely, unanimously, if one can agree, that the rejection of God is a primary assumption prior to doing the scientific endeavors on which they're going about. And thus, why should we be surprised that their conclusions are also of an anti-creationist, anti-God nature? It's because they're assuming it.
Right, well, I think you'll find that creation and God is not taught in science class because it's not science. And nobody is assuming creation is not true. People have looked at all the evidence for it and come to the conclusion, on the lack of evidence, that it's bullshit. And I'm sorry to inform you, Sean, it's bullshit. And you really need to get that through your head, because you're going to live your life believing in something that's complete crap.
It's because they're assuming it to begin with. They've adopted this assumption because they've been, I hate to say it, brainwashed.
Brainwashed. I love that. I love that coming from an indoctrinated creationist. Brainwashed. Yeah. Okay? Yeah, if that's what you want to believe, fine.
Another major problem is, as I was talking about, the assumptions that they make to the affirmative or the denial of creation are a major problem, because in the book of Romans it says that the creation is in bondage to decay, and much of the dating methods employed by the anti-creationists rely on decay methods, like radioisotope decay, as an element decays into its daughter element.
Oh, this should be funny. Go on then, Sean. Give us your vast knowledge about how dating methods work.
The problem here is this. The biblical view of creation says that when God made the world, which you can imagine as sort of a winding up, everything then was winding down since the decay began. But when did this bondage of decay begin? It began with the fall of Adam, when he sinned. So prior to sin, we don't know how long Adam was in the garden. Some people say it could have been as much as 100 years or so. There was no decay in the creation, no death. So the question is this: where was the creation at the time of the fall? Was there parent-daughter element ratios from which it began?
I'm sorry? Parent-daughter element ratios? What the fuck are you on about?
And then from which it began to decay? What was the original setting? If you don't factor that into your dating methods when you do the radioisotope decays, well, then you're going to come to the wrong conclusion, aren't you? It's the same thing as the shopping mall.
Okay, there we have it. You haven't got an effing clue how dating methods work. And where you're saying is this starting point and what it was set at the beginning, when they do dating methods, they actually do this research and they know what the amount of whatever isotope they're measuring would have been at the time that that isotope was created. And I don't mean created by some god, I mean as in formed within a star or however it's been formed. And then I believe you really ought to do a little bit of research on how the half-life of an isotope actually works, because you seem to think that there's just some sliding scale that it just goes from there and gradually just goes to zero. And it doesn't quite work like that. I think you really need to take a look at that.
The last thing I'll say on this issue regarding dating methods specifically is that if you don't know the date of something on the outset and you go to date it, how do you know that your conclusions are correct if you didn't know the date to begin with?
Well, Sean, I'm actually going to just play a bit more of your clip there because you sort of explained it in your next clip anyway, and I don't need to.
How do you calibrate? They would say, well, we use it on things of known age. So if something is known to be about 4,000 years old, we use a dating method on it and it yields 4,000 years. Therefore, it is reliable when we test it on things that are billions and billions of years old.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Except that it is tested over and over and over again on different things that are of a known age to, ensure the validity of these tests. But yeah, you basically got it in a nutshell there.
Well, in theory, but how do you know? You don't. You may say, well, it seems like a reasonable guess. Yeah, but it's a guess. How do you know? And again, if you put an act of creation in the distant but recent past, about 6,000 years, that's going to throw off all your dating methods.
And here we go again. Yeah, well, we use these dating methods, and to the best of our knowledge, this is the age of the universe, 14 point whatever it is billion years. And you're doing the presupposing that creation is true again by inserting it in there. But again, I will say, you have to provide evidence of creation to actually make it valid at all, and there is no evidence that creation is true. In fact, everything in science basically says creation is bullshit, because it is bullshit.
So, if the anti-creationist has made it this far in the video or the argument, their immediate reflex is going to be to return to the evidence. They're going to say they have mountains and mountains of evidence supporting their position that the Earth and the universe are billions and billions of years old.
Yes, yes we are, because it is. That's as simple as that.
The thing to point out at this point is that you should not necessarily, you can if you want, you shouldn't necessarily engage with the particular dating methods and evidences that they wish to use.
And why is that, Sean? Is that by any chance because these dating methods are right and they screw up your creation, and we can't have anything disagreeing with your creation theory that's not right, but, you know, you just have to disregard the evidence, put that to one side, because you just have to believe that creation is true, full stop, regardless, no matter what.
And so what you're going to always want to do is, rather than going toe for toe with the individual methods and arguing the methods in which they interpret the evidence, rather go back to their presuppositions and assumptions on which they base all of their dating methods, and you'll be able to actually show them that because of the assumptions they're making, therefore their conclusions are suspect and untrustworthy.
You know what, Sean? You can say the same thing over and over and over and over again. It doesn't make it any truer.
Because ultimately, this is what it comes down to. The anti-creationist, because they don't appeal to a higher authority than human autonomy, because they base their entire worldview on man's ability to understand and ascertain a coherent worldview, they have no higher authority than themselves. And so because of all those unknown X factors, because there is always the possibility that they can be wrong, the anti-creationist has no basis for saying that they have access to ultimate reality and ultimate truth.
As I explained before, we don't have ultimate truth or, you know, absolute truth. Absolute truth is a fallacy in itself. You just can't have it. And you're just saying that, oh, well, God gives you absolute truth. Where is it then? You know, I mean, if he's going to give you absolute truth, he ought to show himself, just to say, oh, by the way, I exist, you know, so believe whatever it says in the Bible. Because, you know, there's no evidence for his existence. If he proved his existence to us, then fine, we believe it. Might not like it. In fact, I'd probably hate him, because if it's the God of the Bible, he's a prick. But, you know, if he wants us to believe in him, he needs to show us that he actually exists.
You see, man, our disposition in reality is such that because we are fallible and because we are finite, our way of accessing truth is through justified true beliefs. We can only believe truth, and the creationist has a basis for accessing it through God's revelation. I base my worldview on what God reveals, what he says, and then I go about understanding and explaining the world based on his revelation.
Well, there's only really one or two things that I can draw from that. Either you're too much of a moron to, you know, have a look at the Bible and read it and actually see that it's just wrong and contradictory and just stupid, or you've got something where you actually believe that God has actually revealed himself to you, and he is, you know, telling you this and telling you that. And if that's the case, then I suggest you go and see a psychiatrist, because I think you might need some help.
The anti-creationists would say, well, how do you know God has revealed things? Or how do you know that your God's the right God? But that's not the issue. The issue is this. Only if God is real, only if he's revealed things, could we have access to truth. And so the ultimate argument when dealing with creation versus anti-creationists, the ultimate argument is this: without God we can't know anything for certain. He is the very foundation of knowledge. We must have revelation from a truth-telling God who knows everything. Because if that's not the case, if we don't have that, we have nothing.
Well, it's just crap. like I said before, we don't have absolute truth. But do you know what? I can live with that. And it's quite obvious that you can't. So you have to believe in some God so that you can believe that you actually know everything. And the fact is, we don't know everything. And we probably will never know everything. And like I said, I can live with that. And why do we have nothing? We have the world around us. We have, everything around us. We have lots of things to discover. But I suppose, if you don't actually want to go and have a look around and see the beauty of the world and this, that, and the other, yeah, you can just stick to your book and imagine that you've got some superiority over everybody for believing in something that's complete and utter bullshit. I mean, that's your prerogative, but to be perfectly honest, I can't understand why anybody would want to do that. Anyway, that's the end of this video, and if you liked it, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.